Okay. Councillor Steels-Walshaw, we've just got advice to say that it might be best to sit in the gallery on that agenda item, which I think is what you've outlined you would do apart from physically moving there. So if you're happy to do that, I think it's wise to accept that advice. So thank you for providing that. Robert? We have public participation from one member. There, Councillor Rowley is registered to speak. Councillor Rowley, could I ask you to come and speak? It's on regarding agenda item 3, and you've got 3 minutes to speak. I really appreciate you registering. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me being slightly tardy with my request. I appreciate your granting that. I also, just in the interests of transparency, my business shares an office space with the Salvation Army. So just so you're aware that I'm speaking to that item, but my business does have a share of premises with the Salvation Army. If anything, that strengthens my argument rather than diminishing it. So thank you, Chair. Members, I wish to speak to you about my concerns regarding the report and the recommendations made in agenda item number 3, and in particular, the update report on homelessness. Firstly, I want to say that me and my group fully support the administration in their efforts to reduce homelessness within the city, and will broadly support efforts to address this issue going forward. We also recognise the budget shortfall and will work with the administration where we can in their efforts to reduce this shortfall. However, this report into the provision of a homelessness and rough sleeper strategy and the proposed actions to achieve this are not actions that I or my group can support for a number of reasons. The report in Annex A lists the achievements of the current strategy from 2022-23. The receipt of funding from the DHLUC for £215,000 in 2019-2020 helped to shape and fund the Rough Sleepers initiative. A further £1.3 million was secured in 2022. These funds have been used for a varied range of services and service providers. One of these service providers was the Salvation Army Early Intervention Team. This team played a critical part in highlighting, engaging and signposting rough sleepers through the system and worked with other agencies and the local authority to achieve this. A decision referred to at the bottom of page 31 of the report mentions the ending of the Salvation Army contract. This service they were providing now being picked up by other agencies, use of housing stock within the City of York Council and an increase in the City of York Council navigation team, effectively bringing this vital and specialist service in-house. I find it incredible that a decision to increase the spending of the local authority by bringing a service in-house can be more cost-effective over the long term than contracting the service out to a skilled and reputable organisation such as the Salvation Army. It is clear that any funding secured from central government is temporary. While the local authority has been successful in securing funding for the current initiative, it seems short-sighted to believe that this solution will be future-proof. Should future governments change their policy and funding arrangements, then any commitment made by CYC would have to be funded by CYC. This could potentially result in the loss of CYC staff and the related cost of redundancies that go hand in hand with this kind of move. It's far easier to end a contract with an external provider than it is to undergo redundancies and restructures internally should the funding stream cease to exist in its current format. I would urge the committee to reject the report and request that the executive member for health, housing and adult social care revisit the provision of homelessness services within the city and undertake an independent review of how services can best be funded and provided. In the interim, a temporary extension to the current arrangements and contracts should be put in place. Thank you, Chair and members.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley. Okay. We will move to the next agenda item. So I just make members aware that the meeting's been webcast and also that we're not expecting a fire. So the exit is that way. If you hear anything, go off. We are welcomed also by representatives from Salvation Army this evening. Thank you so much for coming, Tony Thompson and Charles Malarkey. And we've also in the gallery I received an email to attend from Mr. Mark Green from York in Recovery, and I want to thank you for coming along. So, item number 3, I'll go to the officers to provide steer through the report, and then we can open to the committee. Okay, Neil.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of the history of this report coming to this committee, I need to apologise to the committee for the oversight of the change to your forward plan item for the last meeting. We had originally envisaged coming to this meeting. It was changed in your September agenda, and that was omitted to come to the October meeting. So apologies for not coming to the October meeting as some members expected, Chair. The original expectation of this meeting was to discuss the winter preparedness and the homelessness service, and we've endeavoured to cover that particular issue in one of the annexes of the report. But clearly, having watched the feedback of the last scrutiny meetings discussions, and clearly the interest in the conclusion of the Salvation Army contract, what we wanted to do was ensure that this report covered the whole of the homelessness service, so that we can effectively convey where we are as an officer cohort and the commitments that we've been asked to start to work to deliver from the new administration and the new executive member, and the executive members are here tonight to talk about their aspirations for the service as well. I'll pass to Dennis Southall shortly just to cover the detail in the report, which will cover where we are, our strengths and weaknesses. Some of our commissioning strategy will be covered by adult social care colleagues. And with us tonight, I've got the Director of Public Health and the Corporate Director for Children's Services, which we are absolutely committed as a senior management team to take this homelessness strategy forward in a holistic way. I think it's something that has not been done before so holistically as an authority, and that sort of reflects the new direction we're taking with the service. Just to pick up, if I may, before I pass to Dennis, the points from the speaker, from Councillor Rowley. The contract ended on the 30th of September. It expired. It wasn't something that we effectively drew to a unnatural conclusion. The contract expired on the 30th of September, and that was following an extension for 6 months that happened in March this year. A second extension, that extension was that we did to the end of September, was under an exemption from our standing orders, financial standing orders, to extend the contract again thereafter. Was deemed effectively that produces risks associated with procurement. We're just not allowed to roll contracts forwards as public bodies. It would require a re-procurement. And the advice from our housing specialist officers, Dennis and his team, was that the work that we're undertaking with the Navigator service was sufficient to fulfil our statutory duties in respect of the work that we're doing with the Salvation Army. I'll come back onto that in a second in terms of our ongoing relationship, if I may, with the Salvation Army. But just to pick up the point that was made by the speaker in terms of temporary funding from central government, I personally fundamentally disagree with the idea that we should bring services in-house or have them externalised effectively, so it makes it easier to stop those services if public funding, if central government funding is withdrawn. I work for City of York Council, not central government, and it was for the authority members to determine the services we provide, and this authority and these members have made a commitment for that service to be funded on an ongoing basis, notwithstanding central government funding, be that difficult circumstances. In terms of the ongoing relationship with the Salvation Army, we both parties concur that we didn't conclude the contract in a fashion that we would have wanted to do so. So in terms of the conclusion of the contract and the noise that happened around the conclusion of the contract and the way that the information flowed between the parties, both parties have reflected that that wasn't ideal, and we need to learn to do better in terms of the conclusion of contracts, particularly with charitable third-party organisations such as the Salvation Army. Although I do reflect the Salvation Army is a rather larger entity in that regard. Services that were terminated as an actual conclusion of the contract with the Salvation Army were contracted services. They weren't the relationship between the council and the Salvation Army. That's something that the members and officers are committed on an ongoing basis to continue that work. I met this morning with the leader and the national director for the Salvation Army, and there's a clear commitment from this administration, from the council, to have an ongoing working relationship with the Salvation Army, and we value the expertise that the Salvation Army bring to this subject matter area, covering service provision up and down the whole length and breadth of the UK, and also bringing expertise from the devolved administrations where different regimes come to play. And again, just finally, before I hand over to Dennis, that relationship we want to make sure is embedded, and the support that the Salvation Army as a charitable organisation can provide wraps round the service that we create as authority going forward. So that expertise to effectively be a critical friend to us in terms of our overarching policies and strategies is something that we welcome and want to continue as a relationship. So I'll just now pass on to Dennis to talk through our current homelessness piece, and then Abid in terms of the resettlement pathways, if that's all. Or is it Caroline? Sorry, Caroline. Dennis?
Thank you, Chair. Evening, everybody. What I'm not going to do is read through the paper. I'll just highlight some of the key principles, I think, that are embedded in there. So I am going to assume that people have read at least some of it rather than take you through it by rote. I think one of the things to mention is that we operate in a very difficult housing market in particular, and that is part of a much wider environment around social care and affordability, as well as things like the cost of living crisis and the fallout of the COVID epidemic and the last sort of decade and a bit of austerity. So we're not existing in a vacuum here, and I think you will see on the news on a daily basis the sort of impact that homelessness is having on council finances around the country, bankrupting some councils if the news is to be believed. So I think it's fair to say that York is well placed with the provision that we have in the city around homelessness and rough sleeping, and we have some excellent services that are nationally recognised and have featured in good practice publications. One of them being around young people and how we would deal with homelessness for young people. A lot of what we've been doing in developing services over time is based on some of the principles that came out of a wide-ranging review of the resettlement services, which happened a couple of years ago, and I've attached the findings of that review and the recommendations in one of the annexes. I will summarise in saying that there's a real emphasis on prevention. We can never do enough prevention work. So whether that's keeping young people safe and with their families, or stopping Section 21 notices being served on families, preventing young people and their parents being put into our temporary accommodation or even bed and breakfast on occasion, which isn't the ideal situation for them. Where we can, we like to rapidly rehouse people. So rather than having people in our, I hate the term, but I'll use the term system, we hopefully work with people to get them moved on to where they need to be as quickly as possible. What I've done in also one of the annexes is given you a couple of diagrams to show you how people flow through the systems, and hopefully you'll find them useful. One of them is focused on the statutory homelessness route, and the other on our resettlement services as well. And you will see within that floor, there's a lot of flexibility. So it's not a sausage machine for people. We actually try our best to look at people as individuals. And I think that comes out again, in the research that happened around. Now, that research involved conversations with a lot of the people actually in service at that time. And I think that that work gave a real depth to and authenticity to the findings that we have. Some of that was about how people experience our services, particularly around hostel accommodation. I think it's generally acknowledged across the people you see around this table that although it's necessary present, we would like to move away from a hostel type environment, more towards a housing first and a personalised service wherever we can. As we all know, that takes time, it takes resources, and it takes a lot of effort and encouragement for people to take part in that. But that's the journey we're on at the moment. We around our very successful Housing First programme, which has been around since about 2015, 2016, we've had something like 59 people go through that system, a very high success rate in keeping people from returning to the homelessness or resettlement services, around 80%. And I think that's a real achievement for us in the city. And we have a real commitment to expand the Housing First that we have in the city and reduce the reliance on hostels. We like to work in a person-centered and trauma-informed way as well. We, I think it's safe to say, and we have agreement across this table, but we're not quite there yet. We've got some really good practice and really good services going on, but we have some real ambitions in the city, and we're looking for lots of support, as much support around the table as we can to build on the existing success, to develop those services, to do better for the people who do have to come near or actually experience homelessness or rough sleeping as well. So again, set out in the paper are the issues around commissioning, and I'll let Caroline talk a little bit more about those. But based on the principles that we've got, and some of the tapping into some of the local research, like that of the university as well, we've got internationally recognised experts in the city, which we've made use of during that review of the resettlement process, and are making full use of now. And I think in the conversations we had earlier today around Salvation Army, some of the national research and good practice examples, we'll be looking at those in the work that we do together going forward. So I'll stop at that point, Chair, because I think it's a session for questions, really. And hand over to Caroline. Sorry. Okay, Caroline.
Thank you. Dennis wrote the book on this. I've just got a small chapter, but the resettlement pathway that Dennis outlined in his book, part of that is commissioned from the marketplace. So from Changing Lives, Steelworks a minute, I think. We commission a couple of hostels, the meme specialist worker and some others. That's a cost of just over $1 million a year. So that delivers adult services. It's part of our plan to enable us to engage with the ambitions that everybody's been talking about. It's really exciting actually to be joining this up with children's services and with housing, so that we get a pathway wide vision, really. So we're all going to work together, commission services, in-house services, and make sure it all works in a really smooth, joined up way, as well as trying to make the most of all of our partners as well, in health, in probation, in across the system, because homelessness is obviously a systems wide issue and challenge. So I'm about to extend and then recommission in lines with the visions that are being outlined at the moment. The Changing Lives contract, like I said, it's just over £1 million a year, and the SASH contract as well, which is safe and sound housing. So that provides supported lodgings for about 35 people, I think, this past financial year. They supported to live within families and hosts, and they provide emergency beds as well. I think they provided 133 this year. So that is being better integrated into our youth homeless pathway along within the children's services. So it nicely ties in with our statutory duties to to children care, section 20, etc. So my bit's only a small bit, but it's just about making sure that my bit does tie in with the bigger picture and the broader pathway. Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay, so really want to say thank you for the report and to explain from the committee that we asked for an update on rough sleeper service because we asked 2 months ago at this committee because the committee wanted assurance that through this winter the best possible service was going to be provided to the people of our city. And obviously since then we've seen some changes to that service. So it is an opportunity to look into those changes and to find that assurance again that there's been no detriment to the service as we now have it. The report itself, I want to say thank you so much for writing it. It's very broad and it serves as really important background as good public record, but also for committee members' knowledge. So with that, I think I'd like to first, before I bring Salvation Army in, I'd like to ask if any members have got any questions of the report more widely, and then we can discuss with Salvation Army the aspects of their work and their experience. Councillor Smalley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and a bit eager because I know I've sort of already warned you that I've got to go slightly early. I think just some housekeeping to start with. The report agenda pack for tonight's meeting is 292 pages long, 120 pages of which are the government sending rough sleeping for good report from 2022. I think padding out agendas isn't helpful. If you think it's worth the committee's attention, then yeah, provide the links and we can go away and read it. But actually, it makes it look like it's quite a thorough report, whereas actually I think it's quite lightweight. I think in my time as a cabinet member, there are 3 types of decisions. There are good decisions, which are good for services and good politics. There are bad decisions, which are bad for council services, but nobody notices. And there are politically bad decisions, which are usually good for service provision, but give you quite a few bad headlines whilst you're going through that. I think what the council's managed to do in this instance is combine 2 of those groups, which is you've managed to combine a politically bad decision, i.e. people are mentioning it on doorsteps. You are literally, taking cash from the Salvation Army and all the excellent work they're doing. But it's also a bad decision for services. And obviously sat here and remain to be convinced. But I guess my first question from that sort of opening statement really is, Neil, you did an admirable job in trying to paint this as the best thing since sliced bread. I guess my question is to delve into your comments just now, which is the council's commitment with the Salvation Army going forwards. What does that commitment look like? Is it just warm words, or is it any, are we actually officer to officer going to see a working relationship between the Salvation Army and City York Council? And are the Salvation Army expected to do all of that completely for free?
Right, Chair. Thank you. Well, just start off with in terms of, I'm not going to drawn into the conversations as about bad political decisions, etc. I'll leave that to Councillor Pavlovich when he wishes to participate or when he's asked to participate. The authority is governed by its schemes of delegation, its financial standing orders, national procurement regulations. The contract was extended for 6 months. To extend the contract for a further 6 months, something that we were advised by finance colleagues was not something that we should be doing. In terms of the relationship with the Salvation Army, it wasn't a donation of £90,000 per annum to the Salvation Army to keep up good works. It was a contractual relationship with the Salvation Army to provide £90,000 worth of services. And I think this is where some of the noise around this is sort of being blended. The authority's ongoing commitment from a political perspective and from an officer's perspective, and I've worked with the Salvation Army throughout my whole career in local government back to 1996, and have had an ongoing positive relationship with Salvation Army throughout that period, both on a contracting terms, but also in terms of, I think you referred to it this morning as your mission. And I think, you know, what officer who has come into the public service to do public good could disagree with the outcomes that the Salvation Army want to provide for the community? So yes, from my perspective, as being the corporate director responsible for the homelessness services, I'm committed to an ongoing relationship with the Salvation Army, and I can convey to you that the leader of the council and the executive member of the council have equally made those ongoing commitments. It is real. And certainly in terms of being responsible for the housing service now for just 2 years, I think this month, we've dealt with a number of significant issues, and this is the next significant issue that we're working through. And what we've done over the summer is we were asked to do by the previous administration in terms of reviewing the homelessness services and the resettlement work is we've worked very closely with colleagues from adult social care and children's services, because what became very clear to Tracy and I earlier on in the year that this shouldn't be dealt with in a piecemeal way. This needs to be dealt with holistically, and hence that close working relationship over the summer and the papers you've got in front of you today.
Okay, I'd like to deal with any questions not related to Salvation Army, because I'd probably prefer to do the courtesy of letting them come in and give an overview of their work first, if that's okay. So, Councillor Vassy, you indicated, and is it about the report, and then we can
general observation.
That's what I'm after.
Yes, I just want to make a general observation. Thank you, Chair. At our last meeting, members of the committee will know that I presented a list of 16 questions, and we looked at them all and we decided, yes, these were questions that needed answering. The report answers none of them. That's all I want to say at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Vassy. Okay, what I should do is ask the executive member for housing if he'd like to join us at the table, so that you can indicate and take part in any discussion. That would be useful. So, Councillor Pavlovic, thank you for joining us. And as suggested, Tony and Charles, really appreciate you coming this evening. We initially invited you to get your reassurance about the work that you do with rough sleepers and early intervention in the city, and to give the committee that assurance that your plans alongside the council's plans for this winter were in order. Now, of course, there have been changes since we first wanted to hear from you as a committee, and I'd like to ask you if you would like to give an overview of your work first, and if you've managed to see the report that we're discussing, if you've got any views on the report, and then I would happily ask members of the committee if they've got any questions of you, and we can take it from there. Is that okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So would you like to give us an overview of what we've done in the past or what we're planning on doing in the future?
A mix, really. We're some of us are well aware of the work that you have done.
Yeah.
We're looking for the work that you'll be doing over this winter to tackle rough sleeping.
Right. I mean, since the loss of our funding, we've had to sort of rethink, because it happened quite quickly. You know, I found out via York Press while I was on holiday. So we've had to act pretty quickly by setting up the fitness classes, and then we're looking at doing a drop-in. And I echo what Neil says, that we need to be moving together and getting back to where we was in the old days of working for each of us and most of all the client group. So that's in motion at the moment. Malcolm and Tony are going away to discuss where we're going to go and where the money's going to come from in order to keep me and one staff member.
Thank you for that, Charles. Okay, with that, Tony, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting us. Just to to start with, I think we were a little bit obviously disappointed as an organisation around the communication regarding the contract. But obviously we met this morning with a senior team and to reassure that moving forward as an organisation working with the local authority in a holistic way for our service users within the city. Due to the lack of funding now and the contract has ended, obviously internally within the Salvation Army, we are seeking approval to continue with the work within York and Charlie and the team, to continue as a drop-in service at Lawrence Street, and equally to work with the local authority in continuing with the nap pads that were available. They're currently in storage, but hopefully we're looking at a relocation of that within the city to help with that move on. We do recognise that communications around the contract, I think, could have been better. It wasn't helpful that my service manager got to know via the press that the contract was ending. And there's been lots of political awareness around that. It is a concern that, you know, back in 2022, we sent a report detailing what we felt as an organisation and what we felt the strategy moving forward. If we could sit around the table, we sent a detailed report to the local authority. And this was going to be discussed at a later date, which unfortunately didn't happen. But moving forward, we've had reassurances today to say that we'll work together, and moving forward, hopefully we can do that. But thank you for sharing. Charlie, do you want to? Sorry.
Just to go on back on what Tony was saying, in my view, in my professional view, there was, I'm concerned that initial discussions with CYC were led by people that were unduly compromised by key staff members within the housing who had significant conflicts of interest against our organisation. And due to their personal issues and relationships, which I'll bring up at another day, were very, very serious issues that I'm bringing up. Much of the worry caused by that to staff and us working could have all been avoided if these people had removed themselves or been removed from the discussions about what's going forward.
Thank you for that, Charles. I will. Okay.
Just
Neil, do you want to?
Yeah, just if I may, we're not here, and Scrutiny isn't here to discuss the performance of CYC staff. If the issues have been raised, if there's concerns about that process, we need to take that outside of this room. We're not here to discuss CYC staff and their performance.
I think that's clear. So I think members and everybody around the table understands that. But if there's a question about the assurance of the service arising from that, then the committee needs to understand that it will be dealt with.
I agree, Chair, and I was going to suggest, if I may, that Dennis just picks up through where we are with the Navigator programme, because that is effectively the in-house provision that's replacing the formerly contracted provision. If that is okay with you, it's up to you, Chair.
There is. I've got a perfect leading question to bring Mr. Southall in on the Navigators, but I first want to check with members if they've got anything to add at this stage in terms of comments, and I also wanted to bring in Councillor Pavlovic after that to explain his direction of travel and feelings on the report. And I do want to get to open questions after that, at which point I can ask the first question about the Navigators. Okay, so Jason, you jumped in really quickly, and then I've got Councillor Runciman.
Yeah, I mean, the question I was about to jump in with, I think will be answered by a bit more conversation around the Navigator and the difference between the two offerings. I also had my hand up earlier for some points that weren't directly related, but I think I'll wait for now and come back to those questions later, if that's okay.
Councillor Runciman.
Thank you, Chair. My question to the Salvation Army is, would they agree with me that one of the effective ways of helping to reduce homelessness is to make a relationship with the person that's homeless, and that changing that person, especially if that's done suddenly, doesn't help the situation at all, but could possibly make it worse?
Totally agree with you. That's why we did a lot of client consultations, because they hadn't been consulted with this move like we wasn't. So that was the big major issue, and we tried to do it as quick as we could, but that was the feedback that we got from the client group, that they hadn't been, you know, told about what was going forward. That was a big issue.
Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a copy here of the summary activity and performance report, I think compiled by yourself, Charlie, last year. Was this ever discussed with council officers, the contents of this report? And did a discussion take place with council officers? Thank you. My next question is, am I correct that you've been providing, the Salvation Army have been providing a service for around 15 years?
So in 2007, I was working for council, and the late Tom Britton, God bless him, he asked if I would go into the Salvation Army and do this program, because they were losing the funding. So he asked, along with Tim Carroll, that if I'd go in, turn it around. If I was successful, then we'd carry on. If I was unsuccessful, I could come back to council anytime I want and take my job back. So we've had that going for 17 years.
17 years.
Until.
Thank you. Can I roll through them? Thank you, Chair. At the back of this report, and it's a very interesting report, and it details all sorts of case studies and the work you've been doing. At the back of the report, there's a section called Value Added. And I was interested in this to understand the relationship between what the council paid for over the past 17 years and what the Salvation Army has done for rough sleepers. So first of all, I think my question is, why do you call this a value-added list, so we properly understand?
Initially, we was contracted to do 1 street walk a week and 4 drop-ins. But we were thinking, well, what do you do with the other 6 days a week? And also the other drop-in day, which one do you pick? So we decided to do 5 drop-ins and as many street walks as we could manage. And we also put in weekend work. So we're doing 365 days a year. Because, you know, what happens on a weekend, if you close on Friday, you don't see somebody for a Monday. You can't just see somebody on a Monday and then not see them till the following Monday. People can change within a couple of days when they're rough sleeping and go downhill rapidly. So we decided that 365 days a year is the way forward. Weekends was email and phone, but if we got somebody that we didn't know, we were straight out on that. So that was the added value, and the boxing fitness, and that's we've got some great case studies for that. That opens again tomorrow, so that's been great for well-being and addictions and mental health.
Thank you. Did you ever look to quantify the value of that and financial value on those services so that you would understand in-house what it is you were doing in terms of budgeting? Is there a way of looking at that in a financial way?
So that one. Yeah, internally, the Salvation Army obviously look at all the data that comes in and the case studies moving forward to look at a budget perspective, but value added money, particularly around missional opportunities. The Salvation Army is a charity, it's a church, and so therefore we're looking at relationships of individuals, and that's what's important. I'm a little disappointed today to say that we haven't seen any service users within this meeting, for example, because I'd love to have seen some of their feedback of their journey. And it's the journey that we're measuring from the day the person walks into York EIP to the journey they're taking, whether that takes 2 days, 3 months, 2 years. We are looking at that particular journey of that individual, and they are individuals, and that is a added value we feel as an organisation we take forward.
What I'm not sure I've heard there is whether you quantified it financially, because it's just to get a sense of the city council gave you X a year and you provided X plus Y per year in services. I can see from the report and from the value added that you described that you did all sorts of things. I was just trying to tease out whether you'd tried to put a financial sum of it.
I know what you mean. It's just that we've had that mindset of we get the funding, we do everything that we can do. And from our point of view, I haven't looked at it from that. I've just looked at how it's helping the clients, how it's helping the council, other organisations, and I've just looked at it like that. Maybe I should have sat down and thought, well, if we're losing money here, we could be gaining that. But we've done like the fitness on goodwill. People like Changing Lives, Restore have given us X, Y, Z. They might have bought boxing gloves and things like that. We've relied on goodwill. But yeah, to be fair, we've just, that's the Sally Army ethos. You do a bit more and you continue and take the money, you do the job.
You've just put your heads down, you've seen what needed doing and you've rallied around to get things done, basically.
Yeah.
Can I just add that obviously we deficit fund, so obviously the Salvation Army does put extra in within each service, and we just feel that as that valid added as an organisation, it's the ethos of what we do for that individual, and so obviously the person on the street as a donation, for example, will say, we want to put that money in that pot for the Salvation Army and the work of homelessness. And sometimes people don't recognise the amount of work and the amount of resources that does take. And yes, 95,000 a year doesn't seem a great deal, but to that individual, that member of the public who's putting that money into that pot, it's a great deal. And I just wanted to sort of echo that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's
Okay,
my question.
thank you. So we'll take Councillor Smalley and then I'll move us on.
Thank you, Chair. And again, yeah, I've got a conscious eye on time for me personally, needing to go to another meeting. Yeah, I mean, thank you for that context. And just in case, I'm sure lots of members would say this if I don't, but just in case any York residents happen to be watching the webcast this evening, or any journalists, obviously, I think all of us on the committee would encourage as many York residents as possible to donate to any of your Christmas appeals, or more widely your fundraising for your services, you know, because it's clear from the report and what you said tonight, just what a vital job you do in the city, supporting those that are most in need. Yeah, from your answer, Neil, I guess the short answer to sort of praise here is the commitment to the Salvation Army, but no cash commitment, which is fine if that's the situation. But I guess that's the quick answer. And this isn't to criticise any officers at all, but I am sorry to hear that you had no contact at all before it being reported in the press that the contract was not to be renewed. You know, I had a great many difficult conversations, you know, in my time as a cabinet member for 4 years, always handling them myself myself and senior officers, about that, and for that not to have taken place before it being reported in the press. There's no words for it. You know, it's sort of, it should just happen. It's sort of step one. I take what you say about housing first, Dennis, but I was on the chair of the Human Rights and Equalities Board where we talked about housing first. It's very good, but it's not a silver bullet, and those other wraparound services need to be in place, because housing first, as the city's own percentages show, doesn't work for everybody. And then finally, I just wanted to, it was reported in York Mix, which I think we'll all be familiar with, on Tuesday the 26th of September, that the housing executive member was not part of the decision to extend the Salvation Army contract due to conflict of interest, and that's perfectly fine. We're all camp members around this table will understand that. My question to Neil probably is, which executive members were involved in that decision? Was it, for instance, taken to private portfolio holders through PHCMT, or was it entirely without any communication, a officer delegated decision?
Neil?
Sorry, let's just start off where I started off the discussion. Both parties recognised that the conclusion of this contract was not communicated well. But I think we just need to be really clear on the committee here. We're not talking about the relationship with the council as the Salvation Army as a charitable organisation. The two organisations had a contract. It was known to both parties when that contract ended. When we signed up to that contract, everybody knew that that contract ended on the 30th of September. So it wasn't a question of this just rocked up on a Friday afternoon as all the contracts ended and nobody said anything about it. Both parties knew that the contract was due to end on the 30th of September. The communication of that, the fact that it wouldn't be renewed, absolutely both parties reflect that that was badly managed, and the fact that there wouldn't be a renewal. And I think that that's it. Interestingly, when you talk to, certainly there's talking to Malcolm Page on a national level at the Salvation Army, this is something that is affecting local authorities and the Salvation Army at a national level, whereas contracts were rolled over previously. They aren't being doing now due to funding arrangements and also, and Dennis will come on to it, the fact that the funding is being provided by central government for a slightly different model. In terms of who was involved in the decision making, the decision was made when the contract was extended for 6 months by the previous administration, because the contract ended on the date. It wasn't due for expiry. There was no decision to be made. The contract just didn't expire. It just expired. However, just to be clear, because I know Councillor Smalley would expect this, the executive member and the senior members within the executive were aware that that contract was due to expire, and there was discussion about extension of that contract. And as I've talked about earlier in the discussion, there was reference to the council's financial standing orders and also the regulatory regime around procurement, because this is a procurement relationship, talking in a contract relationship, not a relationship between the charities as a charity. And the idea that the short abbreviation of there is no money, absolutely there is no money, because there is no contractual obligation to provide a service. So it's just separating the two here. There is absolute commitment for the relationship on a charitable basis, but there are major charities that we operate with through the city where there's a clear contractual relationship, and we have to deal with those in an objective manner as an organisation.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, and then we'll move on.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Just to come back, because I was sort of sat around the table, if it was a fiscal meeting, when the extension took place. It was an extension expecting, and everyone around that table expected, a thorough review, and knowing that decision might be one way or the other, or a third way, or a fourth, or a fifth way. I guess the council came to a conclusion through that review. I'm still sat here today, not entirely sure what took place as that within that review, but obviously that was the decision that should, given the Salvation Army was aware that that was the scenario going into that extension with that time frame, should have been informed of that review. And then finally, I guess just to thank you that for that confirmation, Neil, that no members around this table are part of the executive, apart from the member at the end that had to understandably excuse himself, but every other executive member of the council was aware that this decision had taken place. And I think the narrative in the media certainly doesn't make that clear. And for the fact, for 6 out of 7 council executive members to know that this was about to happen in terms of this cliff edge for homelessness services and nothing to be done, is not great heading into winter. And I'll leave that there.
Chair, can I just add a point of clarification?
Yeah.
So in terms of, I can't vouch for all of the executive members being aware, but certainly Councillor Pavlovich, Douglas and Kilbane were aware, because they're the key executive members we would liaise with. So I can't speak clearly for the rest of the executive.
That's helpful. Thank you, Neil. I'd like to hear from Charles and then Councillor Vassy.
Just going back to, it did end in September, but just so that we could get our ducks in a row, they said that it would give us an extension till October, end of October. But Malcolm Page didn't receive the contract to sign till 2 minutes to 5 on the Friday. So he couldn't sign it, hence the reason it lapsed. And that's when it ended in September. But we was going to get a month's grace, so we can have consultation with staff and tell them where they were, because we was getting messages that we were going to be extended for 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, going in house, this, that, and the other. So it was due end of September, but they said they're going to give us a leeway up till 1 month of October. But he couldn't sign the agreement with 2 minutes to go on Friday.
So before I bring you in, Councillor Vassie, could you just explain that, sorry, further? You were given a contract to sign with 2 minutes
So
to a deadline.
Yeah, it was meant to end in September. But Costa said it had been, we hadn't had enough time to sort of like talk to his staff and this, that, and the other. They extended it till the end of October. But they sent out the contract for us to sign on the last day of September at 2 minutes to 5. So we didn't have time to do it. So they said, because we hadn't signed it, it ended on the end of September.
It's horrendous. You know, if I understand that's correct, I just think all members around the committee should take that on board, and any future working that we do needs to take bad practice like that into experience. Yeah, I understand you may want to come in. I am doing my best here as chair to move this forward. I understand you probably want to come back in on that point. You will be given that opportunity, and then we'll go to Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, sorry.
To Neil, I think.
Oh,
to Neil
sorry.
first, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify, don't disagree what Charlie said in terms of the extension and the late provision of that extension as a mitigation for the poor communication in respect to the end of the contract. The executive members and the executive asked if we could effectively reflect upon the fact that the communication was poor. Would we be able to provide a month's extension? It wasn't something that we would have advised, because clearly there was no provision for extension within the procurement regulations, but because of the communication, the executive members were of the view that actually an extension of a month would be capable of, should we say, manage the risks associated with the procurement. Officers agreed that that was capable of managing the risks of the procurement, but effectively there was, as I've said all along today, the contract due to end on the 30th of September. That date expired, therefore there was no contract remaining to extend thereafter. But I'm more than happy, and I've said it repeated times this evening, the communications towards the end of the contract ended, and I think we're not concentrating, if I may say so, on the subject matter of this report, which is homelessness. We seem to be going around an awful lot around contractual arrangements, which is a matter we can take out, have a separate scrutiny on, or we can take to audit and governance.
Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard from Mr. Ferris that both sides knew the contract was up for renewal, and I'm sure that's correct. Was this report that's dated November 2022 actually produced as part of the renewal of this contract and a discussion about the service, the Salvation Army? And were you then surprised that no meeting took place, since this was produced specifically to talk about the renewal of the contract?
In the past, we were wheeled out to every meeting there was. RSI, we got Rush Leaper Championship, you name it. We went to every single meeting, we were invited to it. Due to what was the saying the other day, we weren't going to talk about CYC staff, but since a certain thing happened in 2021, we want to go on to any meetings, no discussions about RSI funding, nothing about us going forward, no service reviews until we brought up the fact. Our last service review was 2018-19, and then they continued 2022. Because we'd been left in the dark and we was wondering why, but we knew why, but the other people didn't know. Does that make sense? So, yeah, and all that was brought up to fight our case going forward. This is what we do, don't forget. And then I didn't get anything back from that.
Yeah. Okay, Neil, I can see you itching and indicating. I
just think if I might, we've just got to reflect on the relationship here. We're talking about a contractual relationship. We don't lobby for new contracts with the local authority. We provide information around the performance of our existing contract. If members decided they wish to procure a contract thereafter, we go out for a procurement exercise based upon a specification we bring together. And that's subject to an executive member decision session. It isn't something that is effectively a lobbying exercise. It's something we do together. And it's just the way we are conducting ourselves in this discussion doesn't feel that we're dealing with the actual process of the relationship we're in, nor the subject matter of this report.
Okay, I would like to move it on. I think that's that would be general consensus. So let me ask a question about the navigators, as I'd explained, and Councillor Pavlovic would like to hear your views at some point in the meeting. But I'm gonna move. Okay, I'll move to Dennis first because I would like to understand the navigator's role and how that does compare with previous early intervention and prevention provided by Salvation Army.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the navigator role, I think the difference is that the early intervention and prevention contract previously provided picking up people, making contact with them and getting them into service. The navigator role, as I think I've outlined in my paper, is a lot wider than that. So it can do that bit of work, but it can also work with people in service. It can work with people who've formerly been have received or taken part in the rough sleeping or resettlement services as well. So it's a much wider role, it's a much broader role, it's a much more flexible role. And that reflects the development within the holistic approach that we take across services. So the navigators have doing the street walks, but they're rather than it's sort of ending with a street walk and a drop-in centre, they're able to network and to not only provide drop-in services as detailed in the report daily at P-Zone from 9:30 till 12:30, 3 days a week at Care Centre as well. But they're also, as part of the work that they do, they're also out there networking with people throughout the day. So that you know, is picking up the functions that would have been picked up by under that contract. But again, a much broader role and part of a much wider team as well. So in section 11, where I've outlined the RSI Rough Sleeper Initiative funded posts. So you will see that the existing 4 rough sleeping navigators are in there, but they're also part of a wider team around MEME, around we have a coordinator, the private rented sector worker, the mental health workers that were mentioned earlier. We're expanding the team by an additional 1.5 rough sleeper navigators, one of them linked into our housing options team that deals with statutory homelessness as well, to beef up the relationships and the service that we provide around those. So it's almost like comparing chalk and cheese. So being part of a fully integrated system, as the navigators are around that, and it links through into the young people's services around young people. We've got an older person's specialist worker as well. Just to re-emphasize, this is part of a larger network. The Salvation Army work as part of the early intervention contract is a very, very small, not insignificant and very important part of the overall work that the services do in the city around homelessness and rough sleeping. And I think we just need to put that into some context here, that, you know, we're chucking the baby out with the bathwater if we do not look at those wider services as well. Because once people are in service, and, you know, the contract did a good job at getting people into services, there's an awful lot more work to be going on. You know, the rest of somebody's life essentially can depend on the work that goes around that, and whether they end up back in services as well. The Salvation Army didn't have any contract apart from more latterly the NatPads, which we're committed to working on going forward and then getting them back into use again. But the services that we provide with partners across the city, take those people in. I've outlined in the diagrams that I've put out how people can flow through the system, whether they do go into resettlement services or housing first or are rapidly rehoused. We help people into the private rented sector. We've set up a meme house where three individuals who are mutually supportive of each other wanted to live together. All sorts of really good examples of the work that we've done. And when we talk about the impact that they make on people's lives, I'd encourage you to come and meet the navigators. There's an open invitation for you to come out. I went out on a street walk with them a couple of months ago, and it was very illuminating for me as a service head. And I was really impressed with the connections, the real connections that they have with services and people in the city, and they fit in seamlessly. And what I'll do now, if I may, Chair, is although we couldn't we try to encourage people to come along to talk about it who were in services and who had experienced, in particular, the early intervention and prevention contract and the team that and the work that Charlie and his team did. Who are not in isolation to the work that my teams do, because we are the people, we are the services changing lives in ourselves that pick up the people once they're into service. So I'll pass this round to you. Although people, we couldn't convince them to come along because they weren't confident enough. One of the people in our service wanted us to, and this is a really, really big thing for this person, wanted to make this meeting aware of the card that they sent to one of the navigators. And if I may, Chair, I will give you a little bit of a, it's really quite short and succinct, a bit of an explanation about this person's journey, because we talked about journeys earlier. Would that be okay? Yeah. So Bob was first found rough sleeping in February on a bench in some hotel gardens. He'd been living in lodgings for the last 7 years, but lost his job during COVID, eventually ran out of money and had what he called a mental breakdown, which led to his eviction. He was unwilling to give me his real name, stating he was called Jeff, and was very paranoid with police were looking for him as he had caused criminal damage to the property before he left. He also recounted a traumatic incident where he was falsely accused of a crime that he had not committed. He'd been arrested, but later released without charge as there was no evidence to support the accusation. Bob was very despondent, saying there was no point in trying to get accommodation or signing on at a job centre because his life was over and the situation completely unsalvageable. He repeatedly talked about suicide, saying he had planned to jump in the river but wasn't brave enough to do it, but he was considering downing a bottle of whiskey and painkillers. Bob was informed about the support our team of navigators can offer, but he declined our help. He considered it not worth it and him not worthy. As he stated, he was beyond help and would just be wasting our time. He was also unwilling to apply for benefits, fearing the police would get involved if his name was registered on anything official. Every morning I went to see Bob just as he was waking up in the hotel gardens and walked over to care centre with him, chatting with him, and very slowly building his trust and convincing him that he was worthy of help from services. Bob was in an extremely dishevelled state, had absolutely no money or income, or any contact or support from any family or friends. After a few weeks, I coached him at this time, who I thought was Jeff, into showing me his passport, revealing his identity to be actually the Bob that we're talking about. This enabled me to check out the situation, even with the police, and was able to confirm for Bob that he was not wanted in connection with any crime. So applying for universal credit and doing a housing options presentation would not trigger any police involvement. Bob finally accepted temporary shelter while we set up and supported him to see a doctor, set up a universal credit claim and made a housing options presentation. The outcome of this was that Bob was offered accommodation at James House, our main homeless accommodation, which he felt he was unworthy of, but was encouraged and supported to accept. Bob was initially extremely isolated and would not speak to any staff at James House at first. During the time he resided there, I worked with Bob to set up a personal independence payment, limited capability for work, get a bus pass and a library card, connected with mental health services, a social prescriber and safeguarding. In the last few weeks, an opportunity came up for Bob to move to a rough sleepers accommodation programme property. While he found the move very challenging, he had settled in well, met his new neighbours and had the confidence to use a bus to get into town. He's engaging well with the support worker and learning how to use and top up his gas and electricity meters. In the weeks before his move, James House staff noted that Bob was really coming out of his shell and becoming much more chatty and less despondent. Bob is slowly accepting that there may now be a future for him and is starting to look at opportunities to get back into work. Bob regularly expresses how extremely grateful he is for the support that navigators have given him over the last year.
Thank you, Dennis. I've got a couple of questions, but I first would like to bring Charles in.
It's strange because I know Bob, and he came into the nat pad, and that gave him the navigators to get involved with us and get him on that journey. So he started off in the nat pad. But just going back to what we do, which was limited to what the navigators do, we were contracted to do certain parts of the job, but we were the ones who started off the private rentage. So friends of mine, I got 6 landlords on board. When Becky Ward was here, we did such a good job that she said, you've got that much on, that we'll take it in-house. So it was us that started off the private lettings, and people wouldn't go to our client group. So we had to convince them that we were there, we would go in and support them. Any issues, we were there on hand. We had all sorts of people in there. So that was the private renter was taking from us, just to put that.
Thank you for that, Charles. Thank you for that summary as well, Dennis. I'll take indications in a moment. I just want to ask a question to Dennis. And that's about the navigators, and clearly it's an enhanced council offer. I fully understand that. But compared to the early intervention and prevention provided by Salvation Army, I'm still unclear. We've talked about the number of early morning walks that were conducted previously and those that are being done now. And yes, I get the point about quantifying contact rather than quality contact, but all the same, people in crisis being found or engaged with as early as possible, in my view, is really key. We've also spoken about the added value that Salvation Army offer. So my query, the third point, which is really important, is about trust. Now, I know that navigators are going to be doing really good work, and I will take you up on the offer to go meet with them. I am confident in that, but what I am still trying to gain reassurance is our offer this winter better than it has been or could have been, and I am unsure about that. The key point about trust for me is, and it's testimonies that I've read in the press from people that have gone to Salvation Army that say that, they've been declared intentionally homeless by the council and then spent 13 weeks sleeping rough and then brought in by Salvation Army. That's crashed. That's fine. There's more testimony, but that crashing saves everybody having to listen to it. But my point is that there is a trust element that you surely should recognise. I think general public recognise it, that some people, and particularly vulnerable people, won't be engaging with the council and its services. And so how over this winter are we going to manage this service knowing that that is an issue?
Chair, I think I've outlined, and in particular in the story, the sort of work that the navigators do, which is all about building up trust at the front end of that. So again, the focus is on street walks. The navigators do street walks, they do the drop-ins, they do the networking. So, people who come and are rough sleeping in the city don't just sleep overnight. They exist in the city, they access services, some may not. So it's all about that whole service. It's about getting the intelligence about people and linking in with them, building that confidence and those relationships as well. It isn't simply a matter of doing street walks as well. There's a whole host of work around that to engage with people and get people in, and to get to know them as people and find their route through the system. It's, you know, for me, this isn't a competition. It's about, you know, doing the right thing for the people in the city, and I believe that we are doing that. I do think it's an enhanced offer. There's nothing stopping the Salvation Army, and that's what we want to do around the value added that they do. Charlie set up the boxing club again. We're more than happy to promote that and refer people into it and take single access point referrals from anybody that the Salvation Army engages in. So there's absolutely no reason why that value added can't exist in the city. Salvation Army are a world-renowned charity, and we work with them and other charities in the city as well. It's not a competition. It is about us working together to do the service. Now, that contract doesn't exist anymore, but as a service, we are constantly looking for ways. So I talk ways to enhance the service. So in the paper, I talk about the street aid charitable work as well, where rough sleepers can get grants to help them get off the streets and to get them to where they need to be. So my point is that there is a whole range of services, a whole network, a whole system of compassion, of help, of support, which we are looking to expand. And we're looking to tailor it, as we've said. Housing First was mentioned. Housing First is part of a whole range of options, a variety of routes for people to be prevented from becoming homeless or rough sleeping, to keep them connected with their families where they might be best placed, to when they do come into services, find the best route for them through. Now, what we're again saying in the paper and is acknowledged around this table is we will never be at the perfect point until we eliminate homelessness and rough sleeping in the city completely. There's always going to be work for us to do, and we want to make the services that we provide as productive and tailored and successful for people in the city. I think the navigators and the services around them provide the basis of us being able to develop that approach going forward. So prevention, rapid rehousing so that people don't get institutionalized, making sure that as much work that we do in resettlement services is as tailored as to people, strengths-based, trauma-informed, and that we find the right solutions for people. And some of that will be about Housing First. One of the difficulties that we have is around having enough housing stock in the city, and possibly something that this committee can do is help us talk to our partners, to charities, to right-minded individuals to help us provide that accommodation in the city. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a number of people want to indicate, and we've been going for some time. So I'm happy to take more questions and comments from this point forward, but in around about 15 minutes, we'll be looking to summarise this item so that we can move on with the meeting. And I'm happy to lead off that summarising. First, I'm gonna come to Michael because he's been indicating a while, and then I will come back to members and to Charles as well.
Chair, I'm just mindful that you've invited a guest and we've spent so much time talking about the contract, you've not had the opportunity to speak with them. And much as I want to talk to you about my plans and moving forward, I do wonder whether it's courteous to speak to the guest and to ask them any questions.
I'd be really pleased to do that. If Mark, would you like to join us at the table at this point, or we do need a microphone on you? That's the thing.
There's been some confusion because I'm not in a position to speak this evening, so I'm just going to sit as an observer. Thank you.
As long as that's okay with you.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to Charles. Did you want to come in there?
Just to answer your question about provision going forward at this severe weather. We're not going to let anybody suffer with being Salvation Army, but last year we'd have the nat pad And we've got out of area hostels, you see, so we've made great links with areas that don't stipulate no local connection. So we've got great links with them. When we've got over 50 people go out of area just last year with a planned way back, we don't say to them, off you go and you've gone. We give them a travel warrant, keep in touch with where they are. And if they're doing what's being asked, because some of these people have been barred from CYC buildings. I've had 13 people in last week and they don't even think we're open because they can't go into CYC buildings. So we've had to advocate for them. But like I say, we've had Birmingham, Bradford, Salvation Army have got hostels that will take people and the NatPad. So that's what we'll be missing this year if we don't continue.
Thanks for that, Charles. Councillor Runciman, please.
Sorry. I want to ask about money. Because you knew, we are told, that the contract was ending, had you put some people on notice of redundancy?
No, we hadn't, simply because the consultation we felt wasn't sufficient enough. So therefore, when we put that report together back in the October 2022, we were hoping to have further consultation. We were aware that the contract was extended for 6 months, but we were always under the impression that we would be able to sit around the table and to be able to discuss further whether the contract was ending or not. So it's that dialogue. So no, right at the end, we then had to consult with staff to say that, you know, funding is coming to an end.
And I've got a second part of the question. So did you have to make people redundant? And if so, were you using some of those donations that you talked about earlier to make the payments that you needed to make in that redundancy?
No, fortunately, we haven't made anybody redundant. The programme manager has moved on within the Salvation Army as a service manager in the Bradford area. And the other person who was a support worker, a specialist support worker, has moved on to Changing Lives, the other charity within York. And we're committed to continue paying the salary to Charlie.
Thank you. Councillor Rose. Okay, Neil and then Councillor Rose.
Just a point of clarification, members will be aware that TUPE regulations apply in respect of ongoing provision of services. We've had those discussions with the Salvation Army, so as well as the question around redundancies, discussions around TUPE have happened, and the Salvation Army have confirmed that they don't wish to apply TUPE to the situation. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Thank you. And mine's a question as well. I think if we've only got 15 minutes left of this agenda item, I'd encourage us to see if we can find more time, because I don't think the discussion's really started yet. My question is, piggybacking off the last question, it was just to ask from your perspective, what exactly is missing? I know you kind of covered it with the NatPad point, but is there more that you think is missing from this that was in the existing contract than has been described in this meeting so far?
Sorry, we always strive to think, we're always looking for this, like i.e. the NatPad. It's a new initiative. And I just think that, you know, there needs to be more of this type of thing. We're on about, this was our housing first. We're talking about housing first. We class the NatPad as that. It's somebody's first front door. We don't just think, oh, you put them in a council property, like Dennis is saying, properties are short. But we class it putting people in a shared house, a NatPad. That's all housing first. You have a wraparound service. You know, the cost stocks are low, but you've got to look at other ways of doing housing first. And NatPads, private lettings, things like that was us. Sorry, is that, I don't know.
Well, and is there anything else that you think? I guess I'm just trying to get a picture, a clear, comprehensive picture of exactly what.
Yeah, I mean, you continue with the weekends. I mean, like I say, it's 365 days a year, this job. If you sign up to be working with us sleepers, then I think you've got to be 365 days a year committed. So that's got to continue.
Okay, thank you. I'll do Councillor Vassie and then Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. I think someone looking in over the past 20 minutes might have formed a misimpression of what the Salvation Army has been doing. We almost were being reduced to hearing that you were just counting rough sleepers a few times a week. and that you were a small part of the solution. And I want to rehearse the questions we asked officers last month to come up with answers to, because I think they go to some degree to answering what I think is in this report that regrettably was not discussed between the Salvation Army and officers. So the questions we asked was, how does the City Council intend to replace the services provided in the drop-in centre on Lawrence Street? How will the City Council replicate the NatPad accommodation service that's been provided with help from National Salvation Army, as I understand? How will the city fund an equivalent service? Will the city be able to guarantee offering daily on-street outreach services that have been provided for years by the Salvation Army in order to properly understand need and reach genuine rough sleepers, and to collect and share the findings with all the other stakeholders? How will CYC coordinate volunteers to help deliver the service? What plans does the council have to continue the outreach work the Salvation Army has been offering to schools and faith groups on rough sleeping? Will a CYC service include implementing the continuation of the travel warrant scheme? How does CYC envisage replacing the added value that SA has given through its work with the regional addiction development officers? What guarantee can CYC offer that staff delivering the services will live in York? Does the council agree that living locally enhances knowledge of the area and understanding of local needs? What will CYC service include? Will the CYC service include helping rough sleepers and others attend fitness and exercise classes, gathering donations of clothing, bedding, toiletries, food, Christmas gifts for distribution in hostels, teaching cookery classes, collecting donations of clothing, bedding, toiletries, food, Christmas gifts? Will the City Council service include offering medical and sexual health services to rough sleepers and to help with pet vaccinations? Will the CYC service be available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year? And we ask those questions because in this report, that is part of what you say the Salvation Army offers as added value. And to me, I wanted to see a report come back this month showing us how CYC is going to deliver that, acknowledging that it's been delivered. What I've heard today has shocked me, that it appears there hasn't even been a discussion about all of this. And we're talking about our people, our rough sleepers in our city, the most vulnerable people in our community. And over the past 4 years on the Health Committee, one of the things I've really valued has been the meeting that we've had once a year with yourselves, specifically because you're an independent voice. Because any organisation, however wonderful we are, ends up telling each other things we want to hear. I remember you telling us one day, we asked you, how many rough sleepers are there in York? And there was a report that said it was 27. And at that time you said, no, it's not 27, it's 9. And that was because you actually know you're out there talking to people and you gave us information beyond the surface statistics. And I know around the table, we valued that hugely. And so sorry I've spoken at length. I really think that we're precipitating a change towards a group of people who I'm sure will be well-meaning and want to do good work. But even the report we've got tells us in the past year, navigators have worked with 209 customers. It then says a few pages later, during 2022-2023, most of the referrals for the NO beds were completed by the Salvation Army. We also know month in, month out when we have these meetings that the City Council has problems with recruiting staff and retaining staff. And making this move from something that has been working and we've seen all the added value to a situation where we already know we have problems recruiting staff, retaining staff, worries me hugely. And I would agree with what Councillor Rowley said right at the beginning under public participation, that I would agree to a recommendation that this is revisited in order that we don't make a decision that the most vulnerable and poorest people in this city will be left to regret.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Vassie.
Sorry, that was at length.
No, you're entitled to speak, and I share many of your concerns. I want to get to, I think we can cover not the recommendation, but we can cover what you spoke about when we come to summarise in a moment's time through the steer of the executive member, who I'll bring in. Neil, would you want to respond to that in brief, and then I can bring Councillor Kelly in?
Just very briefly, Chair. I think that was a very erudite description of what a fantastic organisation the Salvation Army are, which I think we've said that now a number of times within the meeting. It doesn't describe the contractual relationship between the council and Salvation Army for the services that Salvation Army were providing, and in respect of the provision of the services and the provision of staff of the services, there are matters that the council does across all the services involving people, so children's services, adult services, etc. So these are all important services that support people that we manage to resource, deliver, and we fulfil our obligations as a statutory body. We are not a charity. We don't do charitable collections in respect of textiles, etc., etc. That wasn't what we were contracted with the Salvation Army to provide.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment about the kind of the process of this and what I think is the crux of the issue. The contract was initially set to end in March 2023, and we knew that that was the end date. So what I'm finding really hard to understand is why were there not conversations taking place before that to put together a long-term solution, because I haven't seen or read anything that seems like those conversations took place. And where was the leadership from the previous administration on that as well?
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar question to that. I've got a lot of opinions on it as well that I'll save for another point. But the question for me in parallel to that, I guess one quick question, which is at the end of point 11 on page 9, it talks about a new phone number. There's a typo and it says published. And I'd quite like clarity on that being publicised, not published, that there is work going to advertise this, that we are going to be communicating it outwardly, not just that it is available somewhere, but that we are putting that out. I assume that's what that typo was supposed to say.
It is, yes. I was hoping to have some of our new postcards that will be generally available for officers and councillors and members of the public to use and access and give out to people as well, but just not being produced in time. But I mean, I can certainly circulate the hard copy of that around.
That's okay. Yeah, I trust that it's being marked. I just wanted to make sure that point was clear and on the record. And I guess my point following on from that, if that's all right, and then if you can answer Sophie, that my points, that'd be appreciated. I think there's a lot of stuff in Annex E that talks about provision in the context of capacity and triage pathway, but not about what we're talking about here around people on the street and I guess the features of the service, the provision of what is actually being provided, not just the number of people. And I'm slightly concerned by the fact there's a lot of first line of defence stuff here when it comes to homelessness, and we talk about first line of defence across the board and how important it is in everything from health to IT to whatever else beyond that. But to what extent we're still providing this holistic service behind that initial gateway, but the gateway is dropping and being replaced by a lesser provision, being provided by a slightly different role that doesn't quite do everything it used to do, and a phone number where we're putting the onus on public to report stuff as well. And it feels like there's gaps showing there, where instead of what we had previously and layering on top of it the ability for people to report better, it feels like there's an element of a slightly peeling back that first layer, which, as was exampled in earlier by yourself on the story, and them coming through the NatPads, is how people get into the system in the first place is quite a critical part of it, particularly when we're looking at life and death this winter and beyond. So I guess in terms of what we're missing, that for me is the crux is, I think there's a lot of other stuff we do that's great, and we're obviously other partners and stuff beyond the contract as described. That gateway, how are we making sure that that's not less than it was? And also I share those exact same concerns about how did we get to March without a tender out there and a big conversation and a strategy and all that, let alone how did we get to September in the same position and suddenly hit that cliff edge as Councillor Smalley said.
Okay, Dennis, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so I mean, I would disagree. I think the service is very, very comprehensive. You know, granted, the cards will be available for people, but again, the services that we provide are 24 hours a day. So we've always got people and staff in the hostels to do that. The navigators are the front end, and they will pick people up. They do that through the street walks, the drop-ins, the connections that they make. They are inextricably linked into the charities in the city, into the police services, into the bid teams, etc., etc. They're not working in isolation. They are part of that fabric. They've been around since 2019. They're nothing new. They've just expanded. We're expanding those services previously, and it's a model, excuse me, that DLUC have agreed to fund going forward. We meet regularly with DLUC. They're very happy with the work that we do. They've increased the funding based on the success that we've had. So it is a model that they perceive as being comprehensive, that we know is comprehensive, and that has picked up. There has been a virtually seamless transition. Granted that we could have done with that month to set up services, but the team dropped onto to things like the drop-in services and engaging with people and picking up the street walk elements of the service. But just to reiterate, the Salvation Army picked up people and put them into our services going forward. So that's all still there, and that's still operating. That's 24 hours a day, and it is more comprehensive, I would argue, particularly given the extra resources that we're putting in it. And just picking up on the point about some of Councillor Vassey's questions about gifts and Christmas food and volunteers. Yes, the teams do all of that. We get all of that in our hostels. We coordinated volunteers. For example, the Yes Below Zero project that we did, we over the cold weather period, we managed to house people. We managed to move people, 17 people on into the private rented sector alone through the use of volunteers supporting them in that way. The hostels get those donations. They organise events. We have a post based around meaningful activities to make sure that people are engaged and have something to do with the time if the weather is not so great. There's a whole host of work that goes on around that. And again, I would invite you to come in and talk to the people who actually run the services or are in service. It's a long report, but I couldn't cover everything that we do. So yeah, a lot of that does go on.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Just one clarification, I guess. There's a lot of talk about offerings and offered in there, and I think there's a lot of work when there's engagement and there's work when there are people who do the walking in. The specific question for me is, and I'm not saying that we don't have that provision, I'm just still struggling to see it through the words, is that outreach piece, the proactive engagement piece from us, the identification of challenges on the first night there's a challenge, rather than hoping it gets picked up elsewhere. That's the bit that I'm not necessarily seeing here as much as the perhaps above and beyond contract walkabouts and the discussions with people on that day-to-day basis and that kind of proactive outreach. Again,
I can assure you that happens. The contract said one street walk a week. That's what the Salvation Army were contracted for. They did a lot more than that. Wonderful. The navigators are doing a lot more than that. They're doing the drop-ins. They're doing the networking. As I've said, they're linked in with all of those services like bid police, local charities, individuals, care centre, etc. It's all there. It's all in place.
Sorry, Councillor Kelly's point hadn't been addressed, so I just wanted to flag that.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I was just going to come back to Councillor Kelly's point about there was the meeting in March where it was talked about having the extension, and has there been like a really thorough review? It's not a criticism of what the offer is now or what the offer was before, but it feels like there should have been some time where the options were looked at, and I don't feel like we know that bit of the jigsaw, which is what I think Councillor Kelly was asking as well.
Okay, I think that's really good opportunity to bring in Councillor Pavlovic about next steps in this jigsaw, really. You've heard quite a lot this evening without saying anything, Councillor Pavlovic. I wonder if you could give us an outline of your priorities in this area.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've listened for an hour and 40 minutes, and there's so much I would like to say, but I appreciate that you want me to keep it relatively brief.
Likewise, Councillor Pavlovic.
But before I do, I think there's a couple of contextual things that I need to clarify with the committee and with anybody watching this webcast. Is the reason that I wasn't able to be involved in the decision making around the contract was because of my long, well-established and very close relationship with Homelessness Services as part of the resettlement process in a previous job, but also whilst as an elected member, the close relationship that I've had with the Salvation Army over many years, and so I was very fully aware of all the work that they do, and a massive supporter of that. And indeed, for those members, none of whom other than Councillor Vassy were on the Housing Scrutiny Committee in the last administration, when this issue of ending the contract was made by the then coalition administration, there were serious concerns raised about it, and and I have no doubt as to Councillor Vassy's genuine, heartfelt commitment, but work should have been done in that last administration to have changed this decision. They made it; they should own it, and I feel that where we've ended up has been a direct consequence of decisions made that were, in my opinion, poor. However, moving forward, this administration is, as you've heard right at the outset, committed to ending rough sleeping in this city, and we will achieve that. We are working very closely with stakeholders, and that's including the Salvation Army, but other stakeholders as well, and service users, in the design of a wraparound service. And you've heard mentioned from both Neil Ferris and from Dennis that is the way forward. Housing First does work. It's been evidenced to work. We have world experts at the University of York who are working with us in developing a new strategy that I very much want to bring to this committee for your consideration in pre-decision scrutiny. We will be holding a stakeholder conference before we commission anything, but I've had commitments that as that strategy is developed, if it's identified that there is need for a third sector organisation to be involved, and I can't say it will be the Salvation Army because that's not how procurement works, that will be supported. So as an administration moving forward, this is our commitment. We know that Housing First works. We know that it doesn't work for everybody. We know that there are people with very complex needs who have been entrenched, rough sleepers, but we also know that people through a whole range of circumstances end up on the streets. And that's where rapid rehousing, for example, which Dennis has talked about, which is something that historically, when I worked in the sector, if you came into services, you had to be in a hostel for an extended period of time, and then you had to go into shared and supported housing before you would be considered for your own tenancy. Not everybody needs that. And that's where rapid rehousing, that means, yes, we will give some floating support, some support around maintaining a tenancy, supporting you through benefits and all the rest of it. But for those people that are at the most intense needs, that's where we work together, and that's where I've met with Peter, who's the incoming Director of Public Health. I've met with the police. I've worked with Jamila and the commissioning team, with Martin about young people's, and we will develop a holistic wraparound support package that will keep people off the streets. It won't just be taking people off the streets, it will be keeping them off the streets, and it will be helping them to become where they want to be. And that's where you take away the compulsion, you take away the abide by the rules, or you're out of CYC services. And you've heard reference to people who are excluded from services, and that happens. It's always happened. But what happens to those individuals then? And I know lots of them. I've worked in this field for 30 years. And, you know, I talk with Charlie and have talked with Charlie 3 times a day on occasions. And, you know, when he tells me so-and-so's died, it's more often than not somebody I know and have worked with. So this is personal to me. You know, this is where my commitment to the people of York that are suffering and are most vulnerable is, we won't let you down. And we will work together, and we will work with the Salvation Army, and we will work with Care Centre, and we will work with Hoping, and we will work with all those agencies to deliver the best possible package that will be transformational. And I really want you all to be part of that journey with us.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a really snapshot, but you know, I'm more than happy to answer any questions on it.
Right. So what we're going to do, and I will take anybody that does want to make a comment, but you know, because that's why we're here, that's why we're elected, that's why we paid, that's why we've invited you. But I'd say that we're getting way beyond time on this.
I get that. So yeah, totally get that.
But I would like to say, Michael, Councillor Pavlovic, that you know, I do have belief in you and in this role and in your experience and in what you plan to do. And that said, you mentioned a couple of times about some items that we could help with. As chair of this committee, I am desperate for all our members here to be involved. Pre-decision scrutiny of the rough sleeper strategy that you are working on. So for that to come at the earliest opportunity to this committee, for us to look through it and make comment and suggestion. And I have discussed with you outside of this meeting the opportunity for stakeholder roundtable. Now, you mentioned a stakeholder conference. If we could arrange for a small number of members who were interested from this committee to attend that with you and stakeholders in drafting or discussing the rough sleeper strategy. If that could be facilitated, we would absolutely, I'm sure members would jump at that. So
I would have loved to have, Chair, if you don't mind indulging me, I would have loved to have invited Professor Police from York University to come and speak to you, because he has consulted with City of York Council before, but he's also advised governments as well as other local authorities. And he and I, with the great work of the Centre for Housing Policy at the University of York and the experts that they have there, have written a draft model which I've shared with the officers and I've shared with stakeholders. I'm awaiting feedback. We will be having a conference. The university have very kindly agreed to host that, and I would be more than happy for members of this committee to attend that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pavlovic. I'll take any comments, and I know Mr. Southall first, and then Councillor Rose.
Yeah, it was just a point of clarification, really. When we talk about people being excluded, I want to be clear, though, that only happens in the most extreme circumstances. We're dealing with, people in service who don't always conduct themselves in a friendly way. So they are the most extreme circumstances, and it will be after a whole range of opportunities that we've given people to do that. And even when we do that, we continue to work with them to get them back into services appropriately as soon as possible. So I just wanted to reassure everybody, they're not banned for life or anything like that. Or we are instantly working with them to find a solution to get them back into accommodation.
Councillor Rose.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess my first comment is there's not much point of scrutiny without action off the back of it. And I don't know what action there should be, but it feels like we're lacking one at the moment in terms of what next is. So I'll comment on my opinions, but I feel like there's something more that I should be saying on it. The other point I just want to make is around what's already been said around the decision making to get to this point and my concerns around it. My day job, for those who don't know, involves a heavy amount of service contracting across various tendering processes and beyond for experience. So I've gone through a lot of things like this a lot of the time, and preempting a comment on item 4, we're running down the clock onto the final contract extension there. With this one, we ran out of abilities to extend further, and we extended it multiple times. And without that report writing and consultation with the users of the services and for the services groups, and without going out to tender to see, even if we genuinely think that the council services are fundamentally better, and I'm not saying that they're not, to demonstrate that by competitively weighing it up based on criteria against the existing services, long before March, and then in March, at that decision to extend to September, there should have been actions at that point to decide these are the specific things that come with the extension, to make sure we don't suddenly get to September and haven't got a decision made at that point. Getting Darryl's points from earlier around different types of decision, political bad decisions includes any change whatsoever. And I don't want to make this political, and it does transcend both sets of administrations. But I don't know how we got to this point. And I can't imagine a situation in my role, in my day job, where I could have got to this situation because of the checks and balances throughout. So I want to raise that as a genuine concern. I think point 10 on page 6 says ideally. I don't think it's just an ideally. I think we should be doing this, not just ideally we would have been going through better processes. Yes, there's communication aspects to that, no doubt whatsoever. And to find out on holiday that a service you're running might not exist now very imminently, or that a renewal that you thought was coming isn't coming through the press is not good. Being sent a contract with a couple of minutes to spare. If you're expecting it, it does happen a lot that things are done down to the wire if everyone's in the same room finishing stuff off. But if that's not actually going to be signable, then that's no good. And so that entire end-to-end piece from a year ago plus through to September, October, I just have grave concerns that we've just let it lapse. And if we've got a better solution in place this winter, brilliant, but it's by chance more than by deliberate good decision making.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rose. I can summarise actions very soon. I'll bring in Councillor Vassie, but I'll take that as an action, which I'm prepared to propose, which will be to send this committee's concerns about this contract renewal to Audit and Governance, and ask them to review the process. I think that's what you've just described. Well, I would propose that, and unless people are wanting to debate that, or someone would second it.
I'm happy to second it, but
Okay. I'm not going to take a vote on it unless somebody would want to speak against it. Okay, that can be one action. I've got a couple more which I've already mentioned through what we've spoken to Councillor Pavlovic about. I'll take Councillor Vassie, and then we really will adjourn to take a break to deal with the next issue on our agenda.
Thank you, Chair, and I welcome the comments made by Councillor Rose a moment ago. Throughout this process, I have avoided playing party politics with it at all for very good reason. And I think what Councillor Rose has just said feeds into that. And the idea to send it to Audit and Governance feeds into that. The Constitution says that decisions over £500,000 are taken by officers. Decisions between £250,000 and £500,000, I think, are referred to executive members. And below that sum, they're just taken by, sorry, I've got this wrong. Over £500,000, the decision is taken by the executive, or comes to the executive. Between £250,000 and £500,000, it is debated with the executive member. But below £250,000, those decisions are taken by officers without political involvement. And that's just what our Constitution says. And I think that that needs looking at. And I think it needs looking at because there are circumstances, and this plainly is one of those circumstances, where we have to consider reputational risk. We have to consider the vulnerability of people affected by those decisions and recognise that the decision is not the same as spending £300,000, £200,000 on some paint to do all the council homes. It has a different merit to it and a different seriousness and purposeness associated with it. And so I really think it is critical going forwards that Audit and Governance considers how we can release. I mean, it's not just about councillors having a right to play a part. It's about releasing officers from having the sole burden for making those decisions. To me, it's a failure of process that has led to a situation that we've all found ourselves in a muddle. And I'd just finish by noting that I understand there's a proposition at the moment that we should amend our constitution to ensure that non-key decisions don't even get up onto the forward plan. For me, that's a recipe for more of this and more poor decision-making, because what we need is accountability. We need to be involved and engaged. We need officers to feel that they can come to us. We need to make time for those decisions to be better made to avoid these kind of pratfalls in the future. So I strongly support the idea that it goes to Audit and Governance.
well done.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Vassie. Okay. With that, I'll summarise where we're at, and we will adjourn for 5 to 10 minutes for the rest of the meeting. We will send our concerns about this contract renewal to Audit and Governance and ask them to review. In doing so, I'll consult with Vice Chair of the committee. We'll work with our Scrutiny officer to write that formal letter to Chair of Audit and Governance. And we'll make it public so that stakeholders can read that as well. At the Audit and Governance meeting, where that should be discussed, I would certainly expect that I will be speaking at it, but also committee members could be made aware of its appearance on the agenda. Second action, to request the draft rough sleeper strategy be brought to this committee as soon as possible for meaningful discussion. And third one is to facilitate the option for members of the committee to attend Councillor Pavlovic's rough sleeper strategy policy conference with stakeholders. Okay. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, I'd like to thank Charles and Tony for coming along and for officers for their work on this area. You know, you can all blame the chair as the reason for being late home. I'm happy to take that burden on my shoulders, but I do see it that elected members are expected to conduct as thorough debate as time allows, and you know, thank you for indulging me as chair in that. We'll do 5 minutes and then be properly refreshed so that we can attack the next agenda item with as much gusto. Okay, thank you.
I wonder what it's doing.
Going to restart the meeting at agenda item 4, which is the recommissioning of the Reablement service in York. And so I will ask Abid, would you like to lead this one off?
Yeah, if that's okay. So I'll give you a quick whistle-stop tour of what Reablement is and where we are at the minute, and then open up for any questions if that's okay.
That would be perfect. Thank
Wonderful. So the Reablement service embeds our home first approach and ethos. It's just a service that is both step up and step down, so we can access it from the community into hospital or from the hospital into the community. It's a 6-week program with a review after 3 weeks, and it's for those that are 18 plus. It's there to help individuals regain skills. It maximizes technology such as alarms. It allows for a period of being able to do the long-term assessment of that need, and it works through a strength-based process. It stops bed blocking at the hospital because individuals have a process to get out into the community or back home. But from our perspective, it also stops that individual potentially going into expensive residential care, but they're back home working through what they can do rather than what they can't do. It operates 7 days a week, from 7 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. It's a 4-step process, so the individual is assessed in their place, whether that's in the community or in the hospital. That referral is then sent to the provider, who then works through a strength-based approach, does the assessment, does a care plan. Once that's done, the support worker works with the individual, so a maximum of 6 weeks, and then their period of reablement has been completed. There's 2 elements to the service. There's a rapid response and there's the reablement service. The rapid response makes up 20% of the service, and the reablement makes up the other 80%. The rapid response is exactly that. So the organisation will respond to that call within 24 hours and the reablement within 48. The contract is with HSG, started in 2017 up to 2024. There was 2 options really. Option 1 was to re-procure. Option 2 was to stop. We were never going to stop the service because of the cost-benefit analysis, but also the benefit to the individuals. The cost of the contract is £1.69 million and is fully funded by the Better Care Fund. In 2022-23, 720 individuals accessed the service, which therefore reduced the cost of residential care. After that 720, 98% of them remained at home. 73% of the individuals said they would recommend the service to family and friends. One of the other key performance indicators is the number of hours the service delivers. They're supposed to deliver around 647. They actually deliver 481, but the service is obviously predominantly heavy on referrals. So if they don't get the referrals, there's nothing for them to action. So I'd question the target rather than the referral process. Procurement, we've got approval from Executive Committee in October to go out to procure, which is exactly what we're doing. So we're working through the specification, which has been shared with our ICB colleagues. As mentioned, it is a Better Care Fund initiative, so therefore it has to go through that process. We'll be procuring on a 2+1+1 for 2 reasons. First of all, to make it appealing to the market. 4-year contract is exactly that. And the second one is after 2 years, we may want to review bringing the service potentially back in-house. Therefore, that is an option. There are some changes that we want to make to the service. So we want to move away from reablement and more into therapeutic independent-led service. We want telecare to be at the forefront. There's been a lot of changes since 2017, including 1T partnership working, single point of access for healthy hub and so on. There's an awful lot that needs to change within it to maximise where we are at the minute compared to where we were. 2 other changes are from a contractual requirement. We want the workforce to be more skilled, so therefore we will be asking for mental health, learning disability, autism and neurodiversity training, and also better value for money. So at the minute it's block-based, so therefore if there's a differential between activity and expected activity, there's not much I can do, but moving to an activity-based contract, we'll be able to reclaw some of that funding back.
I really appreciate that whirlwind summary, that got the key points in, and I hope members have read the report in detail and can offer comments or questions. I'll kick off to ask a couple of questions really to start, and I welcome Councillor Coles to the table, the executive member. Paragraphs 24, 25, you just spoken about the contractual requirements that you'll be asking for as part of this tender process. And I want to ask you if you feel that this is realistic. So to do the level of training required for the staff in this type of service, in an ideal world, you'd expect it would already be happening, but you're going to stipulate it as part of the contract. And the reason why we aren't in ideal world with regards to learning disabilities, autism, and the second paragraph about human rights and equalities training is because the staff turnover in this area is really high. So companies do find it difficult to do this training in a value for money type way. So that's my first question. Is that realistic or achievable? And my second question is a bigger one around bringing this service in-house. What were the considerations about bringing this service in-house? Because we already pay a high amount of TUPE costs as part of this ongoing arrangement. If you're saying that the actual hours of delivery were 481 as part of the contract, then the TUPE costs are nearly half, just under half, about 40% we're just paying for the staff workforce that we outsourced to have their rights to their pension. Bringing them back in surely wouldn't cost so much, and we could guarantee that they're paid the real living wage and not the living wage, the government's living wage, as many of these companies in this area do. So I'm really concerned about that. It's been something that I've tried to champion inside the council for a number of years, and I wonder why we're not considering in-house service at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. So on your first one, with regards to staff turnover, HSG haven't seen that staff influx with regards to that staff constantly moving on that revolving door. And that's predominantly down to two things. That's for having a length of a contract over potentially 4 or 5 year period, offers that stability to the organisation, but also to the workforce. So therefore, there's not an imperative to jump ship or do something different. So, but then the other part of that is with regards to the training. It's important that individuals are trained with regards to mental health, learning disabilities and everything else, because that's the clientele that will potentially be seen going forward. And we don't want to be in a situation where we are segmenting a cohort of the population even further by not having the correct training in the first instance. So for me, that is a really important part of the service, what it needs to do, and have that equality across everything that we're hoping to deliver over the period of time. With regards to bringing the service in-house, so that was something that was aired with me on several occasions, to which my point was, let's do that work in the background, hence why I want to do a 2+1+1. So rather than having a 4 or 5 year initial contract plus several other years, then you're kind of stuck within a 5 year parameter, whereas this, it gives us an opportunity to redo the service specification, ensure that it's fit for purpose, ensure that we've got things like the training, we've got the pathways correct, and then within this 2 years, work up that. So what's that in-house provision look like? Look at best practice. There's a provider in Bradford City Council who have just been, I think CQC have given them an outstanding who do exactly this. So actually, can we not learn from them? What can we do differently? And work through that rather than a judgment where we'd have to extend this contract by another 6 or 7 months potentially, have that airspace, potentially not get it right, and then do the procurement in the background. It just gets really messy. I'd rather do this way of, let's do the procurement, let's get that part right, but at the same time, let's also work through what does that in-house provision look like. But then also maximising what we've got. So by doing that performance-based contract, we won't be in a situation where we're paying a block contract for under delivery. It will be better value for money, to be a better specification, and it'll be better outcomes, whilst we're also potentially working on a better solution in that 2 year period.
That's a really good answer. Thank you so much for that. Has anybody got any comments or queries for Abid or Councillor Coles? The purpose of the report is to give us the opportunity to see it, ask these questions and then note it. We just check that. And if there are no comments or queries. Councillor Runciman.
A very quick comment, Chair. I'm glad to see that Councillor Coles is taking this forward because it's something that obviously I started. The Reablement service is absolutely crucial, and we need to make sure we get it right. And that for me, a critical thing is there's no break in service. And this, because this has come in early, there should not be a break in service. I have been briefed on it, as you would expect, and I'm quite certain that Councillor Coles has been, and I think we should take it forward. I think it's a good report, and thank you, Abid, for coming and presenting it.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah, a very similar comment that I think what we're able to do is actually think about it and plan and make sure that there's no gap during that transition, in contrast to the previous agenda item. I guess repeating what I said on that agenda item, we've exhausted those additional contract extensions. 2 + 1 + 1 means that half of that is contract extensions. If we're thinking about perhaps bringing it in-house and responding to Martin's point on public participation, I don't think inherently external service providers are better than the council. Both can be better in different situations. Are we starting that work before the 2 years to start thinking about what that looks like internally, and what's the plan around making sure we're early in those decisions on +1 and we're not kind of having to make them because things have been left too late?
Yeah, and I completely agree. We don't want to be in a situation where 18 months into the 2-year contract, we start thinking about what does this in-house provision look like, then we're caught in between the +1 and where are we at the minute. That piece of it needs to happen parallel to this going out to procurement, in my views of, let's put it out for tender, but at the same time, let's start those negotiations of what does that business case look like, what does that process look like, what does that working group look like, and ensuring that that is properly, fielded, and we have got the intended outcomes over a 6-month period. And I want that timeline to be exactly that, of 6 to 9 months, be able to present something to my lead to say, actually, this is what we are planning on doing, and and what's the outcomes, what's our aims and objectives, and then take it from there and work backwards rather than be scuppered by a timeline that potentially is never going to work.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick things I just wanted to draw people's attention to. One was just the point in the report around the estimated cost savings from working in a more preventive way in keeping people out of residential settings. So as Abid's report sets out, if the Reablement service hadn't been in place, the additional costs in residential services could be an additional 8.3 million, which actually, when you consider the pressures on the council budget, is significant. And therefore, the more we can put into services that enable people to stay in their own homes in a kind of step down process when they've been in hospital, the better. And then the other thing, I just thought it was worth, but partly because it was so late on in the report and people might not have got there, but the voice of the customer report, which is right at the very back, 73% of people recommend the service, and that probably is a tribute to Councillor Runciman and the work of the team previously, and just ensuring that service was there. And just a second comment, that people saying things like that they couldn't have got better without this service, and that just pays tribute to the staff who are out there delivering that service at the moment. And we are all very grateful for the service that they are giving to residents in the city, and it is in the long term a really good thing for residents.
Thank you for that, Councillor Coles. That's really important points. Okay, I think Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point. I'm keen to understand. We always hear about the context of staff retention and recruitment, and here it is again. And you've raised the issue of contract hours. In paragraph 31, it also refers to the target being 647 hours and actually delivering between 406 and 527 hours a week. I'm just wondering, what's the impact on those who are waiting for care and therefore not getting it? I think we all support the programme. what's the impact on them, and what alternatives are there? How long do they have to wait? Does this impact a bit on everybody, or does it impact on some people a lot?
So with regards to that, the target isn't correct, rather than what's been delivered is not correct, because the service can only act on the number of hours based on the number of referrals. So when this was first set in 2017, it must have been a case where actually let's set the target really high, because as commissioners, as procurement, we can only base our numbers and facts on what we perceive to be correct rather than the actual correct. So let's move the target is the first point for the new contract, and if we can't do that, let's move the activity-based contract so we're getting better value for money. And the second part of it is no one's having to wait more than 48 hours. That part is exactly the same. It's because there's more capacity in the system than there is demand. If it was the other way around, that would be a different scenario of people having to wait 3 or 4 potentially days, but we're not in that place. It is a case of clearly that when it was initially commissioned, the target wasn't correct. It needs to potentially move down. I was never going to do that because of the contract as is. I'm saying to the provider, I will let you off with potentially 10 or 15% activity. We would never do that. But going forward, it is a case of maximising more money out of it. So what can the provider do more of rather than what can they do less of is where I want to be with it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, with that, I'll just summarise for the committee that I'm going to catch you, Abid, after this meeting to just talk through some of those issues that I've raised with you, and I can get back to the committee on that. And if everybody's happy, we can note the report and move to the next agenda item. Which is item 5. Can't seem to find the start page. Is it right at the end? Yes. The work plan. Okay. Robert, how is our work plan looking? I think this is the same as last time round. Have you jiggled with it at all, or is it?
The only changes are the items that came off after we were unable to basically meet certain timelines, such as the adult social care commissioning strategy, which had to, I think, come off of this meeting, which looking at the time is probably a good call, that they weren't able to bring that on time. So there's a few items at the bottom which obviously don't have dates to, that we need to determine where they'll go.
Yeah, so on the very last page, 288, there are some items that do need to be slotted in, but we still don't actually have the understanding that the work will be ready for committee. So I wouldn't suggest that we slot them in now. Just we'll do another round of conversations with directors and service managers to see when those items are going to be ready. Robert?
Yeah, I was going to say it'd probably be best if yourself and the vice chair discussed with senior officers just to kind of iron that out and make sure everyone's happy with when those items would be ready and could be considered.
Okay, that sounds like a good step forward. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, on one of the bullet points that says date TBC, I felt like I'd heard something. I just Googled it and it says 25th of October 2023 published Tube CQC report. So unless I'm misreading that, I think that's already available and could be slotted into the January meeting, for example.
Is that the Tees Esconway Valleys one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it has been.
Which they, on a previous meeting we discussed and it was imminent. It looks like, I think that is published in public, but I haven't delved into more detail. But I just wanted to check that because I thought that was due by now.
I think you're right. So that could be, it is top of that list of additional items. So we will pursue that one first, knowing that the report has actually been published. But all the other ones are, the next 3 are internal ones. I should say that the provision at the Glen, that specific item, I spoke to the housing officers about it, and they just want to wrap it into the programme that they're bringing to executive. And I think that sounded okay to me, but what I should do is just check with the vice chair. It would be a very small item to discuss for the committee, and it would be part of a piece of work that they are doing for the executive. So as much as I want all items to come to pre-decision as we can, I think that one is a minor one. So just leave that one with me. It might be the case that we put a line through it. The one below is internal, which we'll pursue with Jamila, and the last one is with the ICB, who have asked to meet. So I'm going to discuss that with them as soon as I can arrange that appointment. It is also an opportunity to put forward any other items that you'd like the committee to discuss. You could either do that now or do that remotely by correspondence. I'm glad Peter is still here, having braved it and has indicated. Come on, Peter, come in.
Thank you. I think it's called the last director standing. Just to note, and I do have to pop off to get a train in 10 minutes, but just to say that the item on oral health in December will include, we hope, definitely a report, but we hope representation from the ICB. So it will talk about oral health, but also dentistry and access to dentistry. So that's something committee members are very keen to focus on. So we tried to get the ICB as the commissioners of dental services here.
Yeah, that's really important. I'm so pleased you pursued that one, Peter, because it you know, we wouldn't want to just do the public health side of oral health. We do want the wider access to dentists to be something that, you know, the city can account for. And now everybody should pile questions at Peter. He's got to get a train in 10 minutes. So let's see how fast he runs. Is it a question for Peter on the work plan? Okay.
On that same agenda item, so you're aware, in case you weren't aware, we were expecting that also to include a report on the trial that took place in several schools.
Councillor Massey, they'll definitely be included because that was a public health funded piece of work. So that's part of the report that we'll be bringing. So that's our bit of the report, as well as some other things. And then the ICB will also have their section on dentistry and access.
Okay, good, thank you.
That's great, Councillor Vassy. Okay, Peter, you definitely win our award for top director tonight. I'm going to say that whilst nobody else is here. I think that's everything, but I did want to say, Councillor Rose.
Sorry, yeah, just one other thing that would be good to add to the work plan. We had mentioned on the TÜV report when we were talking about that at the time about the diagnosis pathway KPI of 2.5 years for autism and ADHD, noting in the reports that I've just glanced at for the CQC report, it flags requires improvement on all those areas as well. Also aware that there's been discussion recently around the fact that the autism strategy expired in 2021, and I believe, might not be right, that there's a renewal of that coming through. Can we just include neurodivergence somewhere on the future work plan, please? If there's space and time.
Absolutely. No, yeah. Absolutely. There's so many strands of neurodivergence that needs looking at. And so leave it with me to work out a topic and I'll come back to you. Okay. Yeah, quick reminder that if anybody does want to raise an issue and put it on the agenda for future meetings, then please do. You can email me or Councillor Vassy. Councillor Vassy.
Just one other thing that's springing to mind seeing this list. Earlier on, we did discuss the possibility of having as one item this year, looking at technology and adult social care. The ways in which there are various forms of innovation that can help.
Comes in Reablement.
Jamila was very keen to do something. She won't be here, but it would be good to keep that on if we can.
Yeah, I've
so
made,
that we're keeping up to date with. the
I've made a note,
opportunities.
and I think, Robert, through you, if we can add it to those bullet points, and if it isn't, if we don't slate it, it will be one of the outstanding issues. So I've made a note of that, and we'll make sure it appears on the next agenda. Just a bit of housekeeping on that. You'll note that there haven't been minutes this time. We're going to double up on minutes at our next meeting. So I'll get my favourite fountain pen, and you will get reading through to remember if all is correct. And I think with that, we're done, aren't we? Okay, thank you all so much. I really appreciate your attendance, but also your contributions. Okay, evening all.
Thanks, Chair.